My question is, and I've read various things on this. I've watched a video that Doug Wilson tried to flesh out on. It's from the Westminster Confession. It's chapter 9, section 4, where it talks about the general equity thereof may require regarding judicial law. And it just seems like such a broad umbrella statement that it could be twisted to mean anything in some respects. I've watched some debates on it. What are your thoughts on that statement itself? Can you point me to some good resources? I just can't seem to get a good, lengthy explanation on this. Not necessarily looking for a silver bullet answer, but just to kind of help me work through it as I consider, well, of course, where I'm at in relation to constitutional law, just standard judicial law, secular law versus biblical law. I looked at theonomy and, was kind of toying with that many, many moons ago, but it just never really got a lot of traction with me. So I just want to have a healthy understanding of the Christian's relation to, you might say, secular law. And this statement, I think, kind of is leading me in the right direction for this section, but I just can't seem to make sense of particularly that statement. So I just wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Well, it's I don't know that it's, yeah, the reality is that there were a lot of, the reason that it's not a super specific statement is that the Westminster divines were not absolutely unified as to exactly what it was supposed to mean either. And so the problem when you have many people forming a document, you end up using terminology that allows for peace to exist, but may also at the same time mean that there will be continued discussion and need for application for many, many years to come, especially if what you're writing ends up having relevance to people many, many years to come, which, of course, the Westminster Confession has and does. And that is why you will find amongst many men who will profess a very high view of the Westminster Standards, differing views. And in fact, you will have differing views depending on what country you're in. British Presbyterians and American Presbyterians could have differing views. The Puritan movement, obviously, had its own perspectives, but there were differences amongst them too. So finding, this is a situation where you can learn from other perspectives and you can grow in your own. And unfortunately, what a lot of people do is they end up taking up sides, getting behind the stone wall with the musket and shooting at the other side, rather than sitting down and going, well, okay, now I've seen 3 or 4 different viewpoints. That really helps me to try to find a balanced understanding of where this is to be. And this is very important today. We live in a massively antinomian age. There is a natural antinomianism in secularism. The secular mind is naturally against God's law because it exalts man's will, it exalts man's final authority, his autonomy. The entire gay marriage, gay mirage type of movement is an antinomian rejection of the general equity of God's law. There's no question about it. You can see that type of thing. And so the problem is that most evangelicals are running head first into these cultural issues while being in churches that are scared to death to ever talk about this. And with a lot of pastors who've never really thought through it either. And we could get away for a long time with rather surface level responses in regards to how we are to view these things. And so, if you're, when you quote unquote looking for resources, I think what you're gonna find is that you're gonna be able to read a particular individual and gain insights. In fact, I would read from people outside of your own background. Listen carefully. You do not have to automatically embrace everything that is in a book that you're reading. You can learn from it, file away information, and then maybe read the other side. And sitting on the two different benches, shall we say, across the field from another, you can very often go, I don't think that his argument's actually being responded to here. I get the feeling that what this guy's saying, he's struggling with that element of that guy's argument over there. And that takes time. A lot of us may not have even the time to enter into all that kind of thing these days, but other people might have a lot of time to be reading these days. But I think that's the best way to find a fair middle ground that at least is well informed. It may not be a matter of having a middle ground. It may be that one particular side really does have it down, but just needs to be very balanced in the way that it's addressed. But fundamentally, that's pretty much how I handled the Holiness Code years ago when I preached the Holiness Code. I think it's a 38-part series that I preached on the Holiness Code and other related texts in the Old Testament. And I pretty much based it upon the assumption that God's law is good and just and righteous, and no New Testament writer tells us to simply ignore it. And therefore, we need to read these things because the New Testament writers assumed that we were reading these things. These are the very words that they considered to be the words of God. And so we have to very seriously understand categories of prophecy and fulfillment, of what was definitional of the Jewish people as a nation versus what would be the general moral aspects of the law. So, for example, in Leviticus 18, when God says the land is spewing the people out because they've done these things, it's talking about the pagan people who've never had revelation given to them in the form of Scripture, and yet they are held accountable for knowing these things. And then you have the same laws applied in chapter 20 to the Jewish people. And so there is an element there plainly where God is saying, I have built into my creation this element of justice, and now I'm proclaiming it to my people in a very, very specific and full way. And so our job then is to analyze everything and not skip anything, and not just simply go, we're not under law, we're under grace, I can forget about all that stuff. That doesn't work. If you seek to do it in that way, you will have an answer to the people who, say, well, you shouldn't be wearing mixed clothing and all the rest, mixed fibers and the rest of the time. Well, what was the mixed fiber thing about? Why weren't you to harvest all the way to the edges of your field? And, when you actually start looking at the backgrounds of a lot of these things, you end up seeing that there are very extremely important, valid principles that are contained in the law, and that's what the apostles do. That's the type of application that they make. When Paul's writing to the Corinthians, he says, you know that having your mother isn't a good thing. This is obvious, and that's in the law. That's in nature. It's right there. So I think what they were trying to do was to recognize that there is a general equity that is revealed to us in the Word, and there have been disagreements from the beginning as to exactly how to categorize what those things are and make application. My concern is not when people discuss that and have debates about that. My concern is when people are afraid to even enter the conversation. And unfortunately, I see a lot of that today. If you enter that conversation, if you say, it does seem like today, especially as we're dealing with a culture that is repaganizing and has lost any understanding of who male and female is, what marriage is, what sexuality should involve, and everything else. we need to have a foundation, and the apostles assumed we had that in something that we basically stopped studying a long time ago. But for a lot of folks,
that's good.
Yeah, for a lot of folks, though, you're not allowed to do that. That's the path to some dreaded error out there. But I think it really does need to be done. And so, I'm not, like I said, as far as resources are concerned, to be honest with you, I'm not sure what I would even recommend on the side that basically says we're not under law and we're under grace. Forget all that stuff. I mean, Andy Stanley comes to mind, but what's that's going to do for you? Yeah, you don't want to go there. Yeah, now this is gonna really, really, really anger a bunch of folks. But I can call him a younger man because his hair isn't gray and he's at least probably, I think he's about 12, 15 years younger than I am. Brilliant guy that would be a good resource for resources because this is what he deals with. But the Ezra Institute up in Canada, Dr. Joseph Boot, I'll bet you he would have an entire bibliography that he could provide. I mean, his book, The Mission of God, would have a bibliography that would help a lot with stuff like that. But bibliographies, good bibliographies are the best resource because they'll give you all different sides. A bad bibliography only gives you one side, but a good bibliography will also give you the other stuff that they cited even when they were disagreeing with it. So, when people ask for resources, I'm always like, have you learned to mine bibliographies? They are really, really useful and helpful.
Yeah, agreed. It's interesting. You talk to somebody like an Andy Stanley and you bring up general equity and they'll just lose their mind. And then you talk to a theonomist and they'll just lose their mind. And trying to stay somewhere in the middle to have a meaningful biblical response, yeah, it's pretty challenging. So thank you for that.
Okay. Well, thanks, Seth. Thank you for your phone call today.
Yes, sir.
All right. God bless. Bye-bye.